The fuse is burning. Why the United States may be approaching war with Iran? The signs are no longer subtle. What began as quiet repositioning has now escalated into a visible and coordinated military buildup. The Pentagon is assembling air power at a scale that suggests preparation, not for deterrence but for action. Carrier strike groups are on the move. Air defenses are being deployed across the Middle East, and non-essential American personnel are being pulled back from exposed bases. Over 3 dozen tanker aircraft and heavy-lift transport planes are heading into theater. These are not symbolic gestures. These are the logistical fingerprints of an operation entering its execution phase. At the center of this unfolding crisis is Iran. For months, tensions between Washington and Tehran have been steadily climbing, but the current moment marks a decisive shift. Planning appears to be giving way to action. The fuse is burning. The question is no longer if the United States is preparing for a strike, but what kind of strike, and to what end. Iran is not standing still. Iran, for its part, is not passively awaiting events. Since mid-2025, Tehran has been quietly stockpiling weapons, the particular focus on Chinese systems. Russian and Chinese cargo aircraft have been making repeated flights into the country, almost certainly delivering arms, ammunition, and replacement components. On paper, Iran now fields one of the most formidable air defense networks in the region, including systems like the Chinese HQ-9B, but air defense strength on paper does not always translate into effectiveness in practice. Air defense systems only work optimally when they are layered, networked, fully integrated with early warning radars, airborne sensors, and command and control infrastructure. Iran lacks this level of integration. Systems are dispersed, often isolated, and vulnerable to electronic warfare and precision strikes. In short, Iran's defensive advantage is real but brittle. This asymmetry is critical. It means that while Iran can impose costs, it cannot reliably deny airspace to a determined adversary with advanced stealth platforms and electronic warfare capabilities. Timing is everything for Washington. Timing is the central dilemma. Strike too early, and the United States risks uniting Iranian society around the flag. External threats have historically strengthened the legitimacy of the Iranian state, not weakened it. Strike too late, and momentum is lost. Recalibrate, defenses harden, and political windows close. Half measures are not an option. A limited strike that fails to achieve its objectives would be worse than no strike at all. This is not just another Middle Eastern crisis. This is a hinge moment, one of those rare points in history where decisions made in conference rooms echo for decades. Whatever happens next will long outlive everyone currently involved. War in the digital age, modern conflicts no longer unfold solely on battlefields. They also play out in cyberspace through cyber attacks, surveillance, digital disruptions, and information warfare. The internet itself becomes a contested domain. For ordinary people trying to follow events as they unfold, simply being online can expose far more personal data than intended. Connectivity, once a neutral tool, becomes part of the conflict environment. Protests are not the cause there. The cover-deadly protests continue to rage across Iran, raising the prospect of external intervention. Internet connectivity inside the country has been largely shut down since January 8th, making it difficult to verify the scale and intensity of unrest. But even if protests are widespread, they are not the primary driver of American decision-making. They are a pretext, not a cause. Despite rhetoric about democracy and freedom, Washington's calculus is strategic, not humanitarian. Past statements by Donald Trump on Venezuela, Ukraine, and Greenland make clear that liberal norms play little role in his worldview. The renewed push toward confrontation with Iran is not about supporting protesters. It is about unfinished business. The nuclear question remains unresolved, the last U.S. strike on Iranian nuclear infrastructure failed to fully achieve its objectives. Approximately 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% went unaccounted for. Iranian planners had anticipated an attack and secretly relocated the material months in advance. If enriched further to weapons-grade levels around 90%, that stockpile could yield enough fissile material for up to 9 nuclear weapons. The technical leap from 60 to 90% is relatively small. As long as that material remains hidden, the mission remains incomplete. From Washington's perspective, this is unacceptable. Iranian diplomats have attempted to reopen negotiations. offering to restart talks in hopes of postponing or preventing military action. America's demands have expanded dramatically since the last standoff. The United States is no longer asking merely for limits on enrichment. It now demands the elimination of enriched material altogether, cuts to missile programs, and an end to support for regional proxy forces. Iran will not agree to these terms, and Washington knows it. Clearing the battlefield at the Al-Udeid Air Base in Qatar, widely regarded as the largest U.S. military installation in the region, with roughly Qatar's 10,000 troops, non-essential aircraft have been relocated. Similar movements are visible at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. This is not what de-escalation looks like. You clear bases when you expect them to be targeted. Al-Udeid lies less than 300 kilometers from Iran. Iranian Shahab-3 ballistic missiles could reach it in roughly 4 minutes. The evacuation of these bases signals that planners expect incoming fire. The battlefield is being prepared. What is the objective? The most important question is not what the Pentagon can do, but what it wants to achieve. Strategy must precede action. American objectives remain ambiguous. They range from coercing Iran into a new nuclear agreement to facilitating regime change through internal collapse or elite fracture. Each objective demands a radically different military approach. If the goal is limited, destroying hardened nuclear sites and eliminating hidden enriched uranium, then the mission requires stealth bombers capable of delivering massive bunker-buster munitions. This would be a short, intense operation. If the goal is regime change, the scope expands dramatically. That is not a strike. That is a campaign. The mirage of decapitation. Some analysts have speculated about a decapitation strategy targeting senior Iranian leaders in hopes of triggering collapse. But this approach is deeply flawed. Iran's political system is highly institutionalized. Removing the supreme leader would create shock but not collapse. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, maintains contingency plans to consolidate, control, and manage succession. Any assassination would likely strengthen hardliners and activate Shiite martyrdom narratives, unifying the population rather than fragmenting it. History offers a warning here. In 1980, Operation Eagle Cloth, a failed attempt to rescue U.S. hostages, collapsed precisely because of logistical constraints. Iran's geography makes covert exfiltration nearly impossible. Assassination strikes are possible, but strategically counterproductive. The geography of war regional politics severely constrain American options. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, and Kuwait are unlikely to grant airspace access for strikes on Iran, fearing retaliation. This leaves Washington with 3 potential approach corridors. The northern route from Europe over the Black Sea and into the Caucasus is risky. It skirts Russian airspace, raising the possibility of detection and warning. The central route through Israel, Jordan, and Iraq is the most likely. Iraq lacks the capability to detect stealth aircraft, making this path viable for B-2 South, F-22s, and F-35s. It is tested, proven, and predictable. The southern route through the Indian Ocean offers the greatest operational freedom but requires extensive logistical preparation. Carrier strike groups positioned in the region make this option viable, and regional states prefer it because it minimizes their exposure. The most probable scenario is a combination of central and southern corridors. Limited strike or total war. If Washington confines itself to nuclear targets, the conflict could remain limited. A short, intense campaign using stealth bombers could achieve defined objectives and then end. But if the mission expands to regime change, everything changes. A sustained campaign lasting weeks or months would be required to degrade Iran's military infrastructure, dismantle the IRGC's security apparatus, and create a genuine power vacuum. Only then could remaining elites be coerced into negotiation. Anything less would fail. Iran's response will depend on the scale of the attack. At the low end, Tehran could carry out limited, telegraphed strikes on U.S. assets in Iraq or harass shipping in the Strait of Hormuz off to reassert deterrence without triggering full war. At the mid-level, Iran could strike Gulf bases directly, raising the risk of regional escalation. At the extreme end, if regime survival is perceived to be at stake, Iran could attempt to close the Strait of Hormuz or launch unannounced attacks on American or Israeli targets. This would almost certainly trigger total war. Both sides understand these thresholds. Both will attempt to manage escalation until one miscalculates. The Israeli factor, Israel's role is distinct and often misunderstood. If a U.S. campaign succeeds in destabilizing Iran's government, Israeli aircraft would move immediately. Within hours of a power transition, Israeli jets would strike Iran's remaining military infrastructure, defenses, missile launchers, drone factories. This would not be about diplomacy. It would be about permanently eliminating Iran's ability to threaten Israel. That is exactly what Israel did in Syria after Assad's exit. It would do the same in Iran. The arithmetic of power war produces casualties and consumes resources. But history shows that it is often the spectators who inherit the spoils. This is not a moral argument. It is a strategic one. Whether the United States chooses a limited strike or a sustained campaign, the consequences will reshape the Middle East for decades. The fuse is burning. The moment of decision is approaching. What happens next will define an era.